Margaret Wallace had lived through 87 winters, but none quite like this one. The morning frost painted her garden in crystalline patterns, transforming her modest vegetable patch into something otherworldly. She stood at her kitchen window, arthritis-gnarled fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of chamomile tea, watching the sunrise cast prismatic rainbows through the ice-covered branches. That's when she first noticed it, a shimmer in the air near her prized rose bushes, like heat waves rising from summer-baked asphalt. But this was December, and the temperature hadn't risen above freezing in weeks. "Well, that's peculiar," she muttered, setting down her mug. Margaret had never been one to ignore her instincts. Those same instincts had saved her during the London Blitz when she was just a child, had guided her through decades of teaching troubled youth, and now they were telling her something extraordinary was happening in her garden. She pulled on her worn wool coat, stuffed her feet into rubber boots, and ventured outside. The air felt different, charged somehow, like the moment before lightning strikes. As she approached the shimmer, her skin began to tingle, and the silver pendant she'd worn for 50 years grew warm against her chest. The disturbance in the air began to take shape, forming what appeared to be a doorway made of pure light. Margaret reached out, her weathered hand steady despite the strangeness before her. The moment her fingers touched the light, the world shifted. She found herself standing in what appeared to be a vast chamber, its walls composed of living crystal that pulsed with an inner light. The floor beneath her feet was smooth and warm, nothing like the frozen ground of her garden. Above her, the ceiling stretched up into infinity, filled with swirling patterns that reminded her of the northern lights she'd seen on a trip to Iceland decades ago. "Margaret Wallace," a voice echoed through the chamber, neither male nor female, young nor old. "We have waited a long time for you." A figure emerged from the crystalline walls, its form fluid and ever-changing, like mercury in motion. It solidified into a vaguely humanoid shape, though its surface continued to ripple and shift with iridescent colors. "I suppose you have," Margaret replied, surprising herself with her own calmness. "Though I can't imagine why anyone would wait for an old woman like me." The beam's surface rippled with what might have been amusement. "Age is irrelevant to us, Margaret Wallace. We measure worth in wisdom, not years. And you have accumulated much wisdom." Margaret straightened her spine, ignoring the familiar ache in her lower back. "That's kind of you to say, but I suspect you didn't create this." She gestured at the chamber around her. "Whatever this is, just to compliment an elderly lady." "Indeed not." The beam moved closer, its form solidifying further. "You are here because Earth stands at a crossroads. Your world has been part of an ancient network of civilizations for millennia. Though your people remained unaware, that is about to change." Network of civilizations. Margaret's mind raced with implications. "You mean we're not alone? There are others out there." "Many others. Some wish to help humanity evolve and join the greater community of worlds. Others." The being paused, its surface darkening like storm clouds. "Others see your species as a threat to be eliminated before you develop further." Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December morning. "And where do you stand in all this?" "We are the guardians. We maintain the balance between worlds, protect the weak until they grow strong, and prevent the strong from overwhelming the developing. We have chosen you, Margaret Wallace, to be Earth's first guardian." Margaret couldn't help but laugh, though there was little humor in it. "Me? I can barely guard my roses from the neighborhood cats. What makes you think I could guard an entire planet?" The beam's form shimmered with what might have been kindness. "Because you understand something many have forgotten, that true strength lies not in power, but in wisdom. Not in force, but in understanding. You have spent your life nurturing growth, protecting the vulnerable, and sharing knowledge. These are the qualities of a guardian." As if in response to these words, the crystal walls pulsed brighter, and Margaret felt something stirring within her. The aches that had been her constant companions for decades began to fade. Her vision sharpened, the colors around her becoming more vivid. She felt energy flowing through her body, making her feel more alive than she had in years. "What's happening to me?" she asked, flexing her fingers in wonder as the arthritis pain disappeared. "We are awakening your latent abilities. All humans possess them, but few learn to access them. As a guardian, you will need these gifts to protect your world." Margaret watched in amazement as small crystals began forming in the air around her hands, responding to her thoughts. "And what exactly am I protecting Earth from?" There is a faction among the starfaring races that believes humanity is too dangerous to be allowed to develop further. They have seen your wars, your environmental destruction, your capacity for violence. They fear what you might become. They plan to intervene, permanently. "They want to destroy us," Margaret said, her voice hard, "before we can become a threat to them. Yes, unless Earth's guardian can prove humanity worthy of continuation." Margaret looked at her hands, now free of the pain that had plagued them for so long, then at the being before her. "How long do we have?" The debate among the civilizations continues, but those who fear humanity grow more numerous. "We estimate you have until the winter solstice, 21 days from now. 3 weeks to save the human race." Margaret shook her head. "No pressure then." The being's surface rippled with what might have been approval. "You joke in the face of overwhelming odds. This, too, is why you were chosen. Humanity's greatest strength is your ability to find light in darkness, to laugh when others would despair." Margaret squared her shoulders, feeling stronger than she had in decades. "Well then, I suppose you'd better tell me exactly what a guardian can do, because I have a feeling I'm going to need every trick in the book." As the being began to explain, Margaret couldn't help but think of her garden, of how she'd spent decades nurturing life there, protecting it from harm. Perhaps guarding humanity wouldn't be so different, just on a much, much larger scale. The crystal chamber hummed around them, and Margaret Wallace, retired schoolteacher and newly appointed guardian of Earth, prepared to learn how to save her species from extinction. She had 3 weeks to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars, and she intended to succeed, even if it meant rewriting the rules of the universe to do it. Margaret's garden had always been her sanctuary. Now, as she watched crystalline formations sprout between her winter cabbages, it had become something else entirely, a training ground. The being, who had introduced itself as Luminary, had transformed a section of her backyard into what it called a resonance field, where she could practice her newfound abilities without detection. "Focus on the energy patterns," Luminary's voice echoed in her mind. They had established a mental link, allowing the entity to guide her while remaining invisible to prying eyes. "Feel the connection between the crystals and your consciousness." Margaret extended her hand, watching as fragments of light danced between her fingers. In the week since her transformation, she discovered that her new powers weren't just physical. She could sense the life force in everything around her, from the dormant bulbs beneath the frost to the birds nesting in her apple tree. A sharp knock at her front door shattered her concentration. The crystals vanished instantly, melting back into the earth. "Mrs. Wallace," a crisp, professional voice called out. "This is Agent Rebecca Thorne from the Department of Energy. We'd like to discuss some unusual readings we've detected in your area." Margaret exchanged a mental glance with Luminary. "They're earlier than we expected," the being observed. "Just a moment," Margaret called out, brushing dirt from her knees as she stood. She'd known this was coming. Strange energy signatures couldn't go unnoticed forever, especially not in a world increasingly watching the skies. She opened the door to find a woman in her 40s wearing a charcoal suit, accompanied by 2 men who tried very hard to look non-threatening and failed miserably. Margaret gave them her best grandmother smile, the one that had disarmed countless troubled students over her teaching years. "Would you like some tea?" she offered, noting how Agent Thorne's hand kept straying to her jacket pocket. "I just put the kettle on." The agent seemed thrown by the ordinary offer. "That's very kind, but this won't take long. We've detected some unusual energy patterns originating from your property. Have you noticed anything strange lately? Lights, sounds, unusual temperatures. Margaret thought of the crystalline chamber, the alien being that had chosen her, the power now flowing through her veins. "Can't say that I have," she replied cheerfully. "Though my arthritis hasn't been acting up as much lately. Perhaps that's unusual." One of the male agents snorted, quickly covering it with a cough. Agent Thorne's expression remained neutral. "Mrs. Wallace, our instruments don't lie. Something in this area is generating energy signatures unlike anything we've ever seen. We need to investigate." "Of course," Margaret stepped aside. "Though I'm not sure what you expect to find among my vegetables." As the agents entered her home, Margaret felt Luminary's presence strengthen. They cannot be allowed to discover the truth. Not yet. Humanity must come to terms with its place in the universe gradually, or panic will ensue. The agents moved through her house methodically, their handheld devices beeping and whirring. Margaret followed, offering commentary about her antique collection and the history of the house, playing the role of helpful, slightly dotty old lady to perfection. Then one of the male agents stepped into her garden. His device immediately began screaming, its display flashing red. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice sharp, "I'm going to need you to explain this." Margaret walked to the door, her heart steady despite the tension. The agent stood before a patch of earth where, moments ago, she had been practicing. Crystals were beginning to emerge from the soil, drawn to the energy of the scanning device. "Oh dear," she said mildly. "Those weren't there this morning." Agent Thorne pushed past her, eyes widening at the sight. "Secure the perimeter," she barked into her radio. "And get the containment team out here now." Margaret felt power building within her, responding to the threat. "Careful," Luminary warned. "Too much display of power will only confirm their suspicions." "I really wish you hadn't done that," Margaret sighed. With a gentle gesture, she created a dome of crystalline energy around her garden. The agent's devices went dead, their radios filling with static. "Mrs. Wallace," Agent Thorne's hand moved to her weapon. "What are you?" "I'm exactly what I appear to be," Margaret replied, the air around her shimmering with power. "A grandmother who's lived in this house for 40 years. I'm also something more now. Something your instruments can't classify and your containment teams can't contain." The crystals pulsed with light, responding to her words. Agent Thorne's face hardened. "You're coming with us." "No," Margaret said simply. "I'm not. Because in 2 weeks, something is coming that's far beyond your government's ability to handle, and I'm one of the few people on Earth who can stop it." She waved her hand, and the agents found themselves gently but firmly pushed outside her garden's boundary. The crystalline dome became opaque, hiding her from view. "When the time comes," her voice echoed from within, "I'll find you. Until then, I suggest you start preparing for a reality very different from the one you know." The dome vanished, taking Margaret with it. Where her garden had been, there was now only undisturbed winter soil, as if nothing unusual had ever grown there. Agent Thorne stared at the empty space, her hand still on her weapon. "Control," she spoke into her dead radio, knowing it wouldn't respond. "We have a situation." Inside the crystalline chamber, Margaret leaned against a glowing wall, her heart pounding. "Well," she said to Luminary, "I suppose subtlety is no longer an option." "No," the being agreed. "Now we must move faster. There are others like you, other potential guardians. We must find them before both human and alien forces intervene." Margaret straightened, feeling the power flow through her renewed body. "Then we'd better get started. Earth's time is running out, and I have a feeling we're going to need all the help we can get." The chamber hummed with energy as plans began to form. Somewhere above, snow began to fall on Margaret's empty garden, covering all traces of the confrontation that had just changed everything. The awakening had begun, and there was no turning back. The first snow of December fell silently over New Hampshire as Margaret walked through the quiet streets of Portsmouth. To any observer, she appeared to be just another elderly woman doing her evening shopping, bundled against the cold in a worn wool coat. None would guess that with each step, She was scanning the city for the unique energy signature that marked potential guardians. There, Luminary's voice whispered in her mind. The hospital. 3rd floor. Margaret nodded, adjusting her course. Since the confrontation with Agent Thorne 3 days ago, they'd been moving quickly, seeking others who could help defend Earth. Time was growing short. Only 11 days remained until the Alien Council would make their final decision about humanity's fate. The hospital lobby was quiet, the night shift staff barely glancing at Margaret as she made her way to the elevator. She could feel the resonance growing stronger as she ascended, pulling her towards someone whose latent abilities were already beginning to manifest. She found him in the oncology ward. Dr. James Richardson, according to his name tag. He was sitting beside a sleeping patient's bed, his dark skin ashen with exhaustion, but his hands were glowing faintly as he touched the patient's arm. "You can sense it, can't you?" Margaret spoke softly, causing him to start. "The life force. The way it flows through everything." Dr. Richardson jerked his hands away from the patient, the glow fading. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps you can explain why your terminal patients have been making miraculous recoveries over the past week." He stood, positioning himself between her and the patient. "Who are you?" "Someone like you, someone who's been chosen." Margaret held out her hand, allowing a small crystal to form in her palm. "And we don't have much time." The doctor's eyes widened as he stared at the crystal. "I thought I was going crazy. The energy I could suddenly see, the way I could feel what was wrong inside my patients." "You're not crazy, Dr. Richardson. You're awakening. And Earth needs you." Before she could explain further, alarms began blaring throughout the hospital. Through the window, Margaret could see black vehicles pulling up outside, their lights off. "They found us," she muttered. "Faster than I expected." "The government has been monitoring hospitals for unusual occurrences," Luminary supplied. "They're learning." Dr. Richardson peered out the window. "Who are they?" "People who think they're protecting humanity by controlling anything they don't understand." Margaret placed a hand on his arm. "We need to leave. Now. But the choice must be yours." He looked at his sleeping patient, then at his glowing hands. "I can help people now. Really help them. I can't just run away. If we don't succeed, there won't be anyone left to help," Margaret said gently. "What's coming is bigger than this hospital, bigger than either of us." Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Dr. Richardson squared his shoulders. "What do we do?" Margaret smiled, raising her hands. Crystals began forming around them, creating a translucent dome. "We take a leap of faith." The door burst open as armed agents poured in, led by Agent Thorne. "Mrs. Wallace, step away from the doctor and disable whatever you're doing." "I'm afraid we have other appointments," Margaret replied. The crystal dome began to glow brighter. "Dr. Richardson, hold on to my arm and try not to get sick." The world shifted, reality bending around them, as Margaret transported them to the chamber. Dr. Richardson stumbled, looking around in awe at the crystalline walls. "Welcome to your first day as a guardian," Margaret said, steadying him. "I hope you're good at learning on the job." What is this place?" he asked, touching one of the pulsing walls. "A nexus point between worlds. One of many hidden on Earth." She turned as Luminary materialized beside them. "And this is our teacher." Dr. Richardson managed not to faint at the sight of the shifting, Mercury-like being, which Margaret counted as a good sign. They needed strong guardians for what was coming. "James Richardson," Luminary's voice echoed in their minds. "Your ability to heal, to manipulate life energy, will be crucial in the days ahead. But first, you must learn to expand your power beyond individual patients." "There are others like us," Margaret added. "We need to find them before the authorities do, or before our opponents decide to eliminate potential threats." "Opponents?" Dr. Richardson asked. "What opponents?" A screen of energy formed in the air, showing images of ships hiding in the shadow of the moon. "Those who would rather destroy humanity than risk our eventual development," Margaret explained. "They've been watching us for centuries, judging our progress. Now they believe we're too dangerous to allow into the galactic community, and we're supposed to stop them." A grandmother and a doctor. Margaret's eyes glittered with determination. "We're supposed to prove them wrong. To show that humanity's capacity for healing, for growth, for wisdom is greater than our capacity for destruction." The chamber hummed with energy as Luminary began the doctor's training. Outside, in the human world, Margaret knew Agent Thorne and her team would be mobilizing every resource to find them. And somewhere above, their true opponents were watching, waiting for humanity to give them an excuse to act. "Time grows short," Luminary warned. "We must find the others quickly. The Weaver, the Shaper, the Dreamer, all must be awakened before the solstice." Margaret nodded, already sensing another resonance, this one coming from somewhere in the southwest. "Then we'd better get moving. Earth's not going to save itself." As Dr. Richardson began learning to control his expanded abilities, Margaret prepared for their next recruitment. They were building a resistance, not just against alien threats, but against humanity's own worst instincts. The snow continued to fall outside, covering their tracks, while beneath the surface of normal reality, a battle for Earth's future was quietly taking shape. Would you like me to continue with Part 4? The story will escalate as they gather more Guardians and face increasing opposition from both human and alien forces. The Arizona desert shimmered under the winter sun as Margaret and Dr. Richardson materialized behind a small trailer home. In the week since his awakening, the doctor had adapted quickly to their new reality, learning to control his expanded healing abilities while helping locate other potential Guardians. "This one's different," Margaret said, sensing the energy patterns around the trailer. "Much stronger." A wind chime made of twisted copper wire and desert glass tinkled in the breeze. As they approached, the metal began to writhe and dance, responding to an unseen force. The trailer's door flew open before they could knock. A woman in her 30s stood there, her dark hair streaked with gray, eyes fierce. "I knew someone would come eventually," she said, copper wires coiling protectively around her arms. "I just didn't expect a grandmother and a doctor." "Grace Ironweaver," Margaret smiled. "A pleasure to finally meet you." "The metal speaks to you, doesn't it?" Dr. Richardson asked. "Like my patients speak to me." Grace studied them warily. "For the past 2 weeks, every piece of metal within a mile radius has been singing to me. The government's been sniffing around, but they're easy enough to discourage when their vehicles mysteriously break down. She is the Shaper," Luminary's voice echoed in their minds. "One who can bend the elements to her will." Grace startled at the voice but held her ground. "What was that?" "That," Margaret said, "was the being who helped us awaken our abilities. The same being who can help you understand yours. But we need to move quickly. We're not the only ones looking for you." As if on cue, a shadow passed over the sun. They looked up to see a massive shape briefly breaking through the cloud cover, something that definitely wasn't an airplane. "They're getting bolder," Dr. Richardson muttered. Grace's eyes widened. "That's not one of ours, is it?" "No." Margaret created a crystal barrier around them as more shadows appeared above. "Those would be the ones who want to eliminate humanity before we become a problem. Care to help us prove them wrong?" Grace watched as the copper wires around her arms formed intricate patterns, responding to her agitation. "What exactly are we talking about here?" "Becoming a guardian of Earth. Fighting against both alien forces that want us eliminated and human authorities who would control and suppress our abilities. Oh, and we have about 5 days left to save the world." Margaret gave her most grandmotherly smile. "Interested?" A massive ship broke through the clouds, its surface darkening the desert sky. Grace looked at her trailer, then at the impossibly advanced craft above them. "Well," she grinned, the metal around her humming with power, beats working at the copper mine. The ship began charging what was clearly a weapon. Grace raised her hands, and every piece of metal in a half-mile radius rose into the air, forming a protective dome over them. Margaret's crystals interwove with the metal, strengthening it, while Dr. Richardson created a field of pure life energy around them. Now, Luminary commanded, while they're focused on us, we must find the last guardian. The dreamer. Margaret nodded, expanding her consciousness. There, a flicker of familiar energy, coming from New York City. The final piece they needed. The ship fired, its energy beams splitting into multiple streams. Grace's metal shield held, barely, as Margaret created a portal beneath them. Time to go. They vanished just as the beam broke through, leaving behind a very confused alien attack force and a lot of floating metal. In the crystalline chamber, Grace staggered, taking in the impossible architecture around her. This is real. This is all real. Very. Dr. Richardson steadied her. And it gets stranger. We've found the last one, Margaret announced. A young man in Manhattan. An artist whose dreams have started coming true. Literally. The council gathers in 3 days. Luminary materialized beside them. The enemy forces grow desperate. They will try to eliminate the potential guardians before they can awaken. Then we better get to him first, Grace said, already adapting to her new reality. The metal she brought with her formed complex patterns in the air, reflecting the chamber's light. Because I'm starting to think we might actually have a chance at this. Margaret smiled, watching her team of impossible heroes prepare for their next mission. A healer who could restore life itself. A shaper who could bend reality through the elements. And soon, a dreamer who could turn imagination into power. Not bad for a grandmother who just wanted to tend her garden. But as she created the portal to New York, she felt a tremor of warning. The enemy wasn't just above them now. They had infiltrated Earth's governments, manipulated events to push humanity toward destruction. The final confrontation would test not just their powers, but their faith in humanity itself. And time was running out. Continued in Part 5. The resolution. The winter solstice dawned cold and clear over New York City. Margaret stood atop the Empire State Building with her team of guardians, watching the sun rise on what might be humanity's last day. David Chen, their newest member, the dreamer, sat cross-legged nearby, his artist's hands moving through the air as he literally drew reality into new shapes. They'd found him just in time, awakening his abilities mere hours before enemy forces could reach him. They're coming, Grace said, the metal infrastructure of the building humming warnings through her consciousness. From above and below. Dr. Richardson nodded, sensing the life forces converging on their position. Government forces in the streets. Alien ships breaking orbit. We're surrounded. Margaret smiled, feeling oddly peaceful. Good. Saves us the trouble of hunting them down. The past 2 days had been a crash course in guardian abilities for David. His power to turn dreams into reality had proven invaluable, helping them escape multiple traps while gathering allies among both humans and sympathetic alien races. The council convenes at midday. Luminary's voice echoed in their minds. You must hold this position until then. Show them humanity's worth. The first ships appeared, massive black shapes descending through the clouds. Below, military vehicles converged on the building. Agent Thorne's voice boomed through a megaphone. This is your final warning. Surrender and help us defend Earth. They still don't understand, David said softly, his reality warping art creating defensive patterns in the air. We are defending Earth, just not the way they think. Margaret stepped to the edge of the building. We don't have to fight. She called out to both forces. We're trying to prove that humanity has moved beyond violence as our only solution. A beam of energy lanced down from one of the ships, only to be caught in Grace's metal web and Dr. Richardson's healing field. David's artwork came alive, turning the attack into harmless light. So much for diplomacy, Grace muttered, pulling more metal from the city's infrastructure to strengthen their defenses. The battle erupted from all sides. Ships fired from above, while human forces launched an assault from below. The 4 guardians stood back to back, their powers combining in ways that defied physics. Margaret's crystals created a foundation, a framework of pure energy. Grace's metal formed an ever-shifting shield while conducting their combined power. Dr. Richardson's healing energy kept them whole, repairing damage instantly. And David's dreams gave their defenses impossible configurations, turning reality itself into their ally. But they were vastly outnumbered, and Margaret could feel their strength fading. "Look," Luminary commanded suddenly. "Look what's happening below." Margaret spared a glance downward and gasped. People were coming out of buildings, filling the streets, not running away, but standing firm, watching, witnessing. They're not afraid, Dr. Richardson realized. They're hoping. Agent Thorne's voice crackled through the chaos. "Stand down. Look at them. They're protecting us, not fighting us." Above, the alien ships pressed their attack, but something was changing. The crowd below began to emit a faint glow, the same energy signature as a guardian, but smaller, untapped. Every human has this potential. Margaret breathed, understanding at last. We're not special. We're just the first to wake up. The glow spread through the crowd, a web of light connecting every person. Margaret felt their hopes, their dreams, their collective will to survive and grow and become better. "Now," she commanded, "channel their energy." The four guardians raised their hands, drawing on the pure human potential radiating from below. Margaret's crystals amplified it, Grace's metal conducted it, Richardson's healing power purified it, and David's dreams gave it form. A pulse of pure creation erupted from the Empire State Building, expanding outward in a wave of golden light. Where it touched the alien ships, their weapons transformed into art. Where it met human weapons, they burst into flowers. The wave continued, circling the globe in seconds, and everywhere it touched, people awakened to their own small spark of guardian energy. Not enough to change reality, but enough to change themselves. The ships hung motionless in the air. In Margaret's mind, Luminary's voice rang with triumph. "The Council has witnessed. The vote is cast. Earth will live." Slowly, the ships retreated, their weapons permanently transformed. Below, Agent Thorne and her forces lowered their useless guns, staring up in wonder. "What happens now?" David asked, his artist's hands still weaving reality into more beautiful patterns. Margaret looked out over the city, feeling the pulse of awakened humanity. "Now we teach. We help others understand their potential. We show them that power isn't for destroying or controlling. It's for creating, healing, shaping a better world. A world worthy of joining the galactic community," Dr. Richardson added. Grace laughed, letting her metal constructs form a beautiful mobile above the crowd. "Not bad for a few weeks' work, Grandma." Margaret smiled, thinking of her garden where this had all started. A simple place where she had learned the most important lesson of all, that growth requires patience, care, and faith in the future. "Come on," she said to her fellow guardians. "We have work to do." The sun reached its winter zenith as they descended to meet the awakened world below, the shortest day of the year marking humanity's newest beginning. And in a garden in New Hampshire, crystalline flowers began to bloom, a sign that Earth's first guardian had opened the door to a future filled with impossible possibilities. The end.